Welcome viewers to Voice of America's Washington studios. I'm Raza Naqvi. Today we were talking about India-Pakistan trade, but because of the breaking news that Ambassador Husain Haqqani, Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States, has resigned, has offered his resignation to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has accepted, we will be addressing this question and talking about what this decision of the Prime Minister and of the Ambassador, how it will impact some of the relations between Pakistan and the United States. We'll also talk about, later in the program, the original topic of Pakistan trade with India. But to discuss these issues, we are joined here today by Dr. Walter Anderson, a renowned South Asia expert at the School of Advanced International Studies. And joining us from Bloomington, Indiana, is Dr. Sumit Gupta, also a renowned South Asia scholar. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Anderson, I want to begin with you. And as we were listening to before the show, we heard this news of Ambassador Husain Haqqani resigning, offering his resignation, and the Prime Minister accepting it. Now, what do you think, how do you see this whole episode, this whole Memogate scandal has led up to this point? How do you view this sitting here in Washington?
Well, I think what you have is basically an issue of domestic Pakistani politics that's playing out on this issue. Someone had raised the question about what impact the resignation, if it in fact holds, has on Pakistan-U.S. relations. I think there are two issues. One is Ambassador Haqqani was very popular in this town and quite effective in presenting Pakistan's viewpoint. In very difficult circumstances, he was able to get a hearing around town because he had developed close and personal relations. He knew how to speak to Americans in terms that they understood in their language because he knows how our system operates.
You're talking about congressmen, think tanks,
all of that,
DC circuit.
He knew how to operate that circuit, and he kept in a lot of contact. In fact, I was supposed to have lunch with some others this coming week, which I assume will now be called off. So he knew how to do that, and in that he was effective in representing Pakistan's viewpoint, as I said, under the most difficult circumstances. So that's one set of issues. The other one, it's always more difficult when a country does not have an ambassador, both for the way embassies function, as well as being able to sort of speak on behalf of your country at the highest level to people in the government here, in the U.S. government. Because if it's the chargé, as it will be, the DCM, the Deputy Chief of Mission, who represents, while Pakistan has a very effective Deputy Chief of Mission, in terms of that person being able to speak for the highest levels of the government is sometimes questioned by the interlocutors here. So it's not the best circumstance to have a post like that occupied by the number two. It's always better to have number one.
Well, before I ask Dr. Ganguly the same question, you touched on this issue of a representative of a country in, let's say, D.C., having the people in D.C. having the confidence that they are talking to someone who has the confidence of the government back home. However, this is one of the issues with Ambassador Haqqani, and it came to the fore with this Memogate scandal that he might have been speaking for particular part of the Pakistani government, let's say the civilians, and may not have been representing as much the military and the establishment. How do you respond to that?
Well, this is where the first issue I mentioned comes up. We don't really know yet, and there is going to be an investigation, as you know, into the whole question. There's a lot of murky details in all of this. And so did he in fact represent the government? He may have, or part of the government, or is this all a grand hoax? We don't know. I have my own views, but at this point I think we don't know really
we'll
enough.
Look to that investigation pretty eagerly.
Later.
Dr. Ganguly, just right off the bat, what's your reaction to this news?
Well, to begin with, I think this is most unfortunate for Pakistan because I think that, as Walter very correctly pointed out, Hussain was an extraordinarily able representative of his government. Now, whether he represented every quarter of that government remains an open question. But he had superb contacts in Washington. He knew exactly how to speak to Americans in a language that they could comprehend, and also he knew how to work the entire Beltway circuit. In recent memory, I cannot think of a Pakistani ambassador who had the kind of standing that he enjoyed in the Washington diplomatic corps. So to begin with, there is a vacuum that he leaves behind, especially if this investigation does not clear him and he does not return to his position, which at the present time looks somewhat unlikely. The second is, it remains to be seen if this investigation becomes a witch hunt or if it is a fair investigation and it seeks to really get to the bottom of the matter, what exactly transpired, because the details remain extremely unclear at this point. There are conflicting accounts, there are partial accounts, and we don't have a full picture of what actually took place. And as a consequence, I think it's important to suspend judgment and see how the matter unfolds in the next few days and weeks. But the bottom line remains that this is a sad development for US-Pakistan relations,
right,
and particularly for the civilian regime in Pakistan, who could not have had a more effective spokesman in Washington, DC.
Right. Dr. Guli, thank you. We are going to go now over to Islamabad, where my colleague Maria Zulfikar is in Express Studios, and let's get the reaction of her and her guests to this late-breaking news that Ambassador Husain Haqqani has offered his resignation and has been accepted. Maria, what's the reaction over on your end?
Thank you, Raza. First of all, I'd like to introduce our viewers to my guest. Joining me in my Lahore studios is Dr Akmal Hussain, Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Beacon House University and also at the FC College. Sir, pleasure to have you here. Now, as you saw the breaking news while we were about to start this program, Ambassador Haqqani has resigned, his resignation has been accepted. My question to you here is that, is this going to end here, or is he just being made the scapegoat to pacify certain elements in the military and certain elements in the opposition, as many here in Pakistan feel? What's your stance on that?
Well, I think the unfortunate thing is that the contention between the elected government and the military establishment, which has been underlying the political process for many years, has now in a sense come out into the open. And in many ways, the exit of Ambassador Haqqani can be seen as a kind of consequence of the fact that this contention has in a sense become uncontrolled. And so the ambassador falls. But the real question is, how is it that Pakistan's ambassador reached out to a foreign government to resolve what are essentially intimately internal questions to Pakistan, questions regarding the structuring of its security apparatus, questions regarding the relationship between the civilian government and the military. These are really questions that have to be resolved on the basis of popular support and through a democratic process, rather than through the intervention of a foreign country.
So, Dr. Hussain, would you say that his acceptance, the acceptance of his resignation and the demand for his resignation both signify the charges leveled against him and the credibility of the charges leveled against him? Does that signify that in any way?
Not necessarily. I mean, he could have been a heroic scapegoat. And the hope may be that this whole sorry tale might be sort of cut short by his resignation. But the real danger is that this may be the beginning rather than the end of the sorry tale.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, what I mean is that, you know, there are three kinds of questions which are being asked across the country and perhaps across the world. First, what were the particular circumstances which forced a responsible member of the government to reach out to a foreign power to resolve the relationship between the government and the military and to restructure the state apparatus itself? So that's the first question. What was the specific nature of the crisis which induced Ambassador Haqqani, if indeed he did so, which induced Ambassador Haqqani to engage on such a dangerous and desperate course of action? So that's the first question. The second question is, who else was involved in all this? And why was this scandal exposed by the proximate author of the whole thing, Mr.
Mansoor Ijaz.
Mansoor Ijaz. The third question is that if indeed this so-called scandal was the expression of an internecine quarrel within the state structure, then has that quarrel or has that contention come to an end, or does it continue? Because if it does continue, then really the democratic edifice itself is under threat.
Right, and now I'd like to shift gears and I'd like to talk about the topic that we were to discuss today, the topic of our program today, which is Indo-Pak relations. So I'd like to ask you, Dr. Hussain, that we are talking about granting an MFN status to India. Why is there a delay? Everything seems in order, but still there is a delay. What do you think is the delay here?
Well, actually, you know, the word MFN, most favored nation, is a misnomer, because what it really refers to under the World Trade Organization rules is to grant the same status to a particular country that you have granted to your best trading partner. So in a sense, what it refers to is returning to kind of normal trading relationship with X country. In this case, it happens to be India. So in other words, instead of discriminating against India, what MFN is really calling for is to restore normal trading relations with India. Now, given the ideological factor that has unfortunately marred India-Pakistan relations and the misperceptions about the possible consequences of free trade with India, there's clearly a lot of hesitation. And this hesitation to some extent is the result of perhaps of the contention between various factions within the state itself, if you like.
Right. Raza, I'll cross over to you, and it's over to you from here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maria. Now, this issue of trade between India and Pakistan, Dr. Anderson, give us some context here. Now, we've seen in the past month and 2 months and 3 months that there's been some momentum here. There's been a little bit of movement. There have been at least very good statements coming from both sides, positive towards trade. The Secretary's meeting last week made some commitments towards at least furthering the dialogue, if not some solid commitments about things like the negative and positive list. Give us some context about the India-Pakistan relationship and how significant this sort of movement is within that context.
Well, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on the Indian side has long been pushing for an improvement in the relationship. I think you see on the Pakistani side a greater receptivity to his overtures on that. And I think this is all to the good. From the perspective of the U.S., this is something that we, in fact, have been ourselves pushing for some time. And it's interesting that the decision to move in this direction, apparently one had the support and vetting of the military to do this, which is a good sign.
The Pakistani military.
The Pakistan military, which had a good sign. And the other, it had no conditions. On both sides had conditions before. On the Indian side, we really can't move very far until you do something serious about the perpetrators of the Mumbai attack and the whole issue of terrorism in general in Pakistan. And on the Pakistan side, we really can't move until there's some significant movement on the Kashmir issue.
So what changed?
And that has been put on the back burner. I'd say on the Indian side, the sense was that it's in India's interest, and I think the Prime Minister is a leading advocate of that. There are people who are opposed to him, as there are people in Pakistan opposed to this move as well, as you mentioned. But there is in India too. But he's pushed for this. He's done it now for quite some time because he thinks, and I think he's right, that it genuinely is India's interest to do it, particularly if the lead on this is economic, which apparently it is, because in fact that plays to India's strength in terms of the relationship. On the Pakistan side, I think that, it's the nature of the economy, the very poor nature of the economy from the economic standpoint. India offers a huge market for Pakistani products. There's some 300 million people versus the 20 to 30 million it has today. There's also the possibility of Indian capital, and we know that sources of Indian capital like the Tatas have proposed investment in Pakistan, and so far that has been effectively turned down. I'd say in the future it may not well, because Pakistan needs capital for
so
development.
it's something that could benefit Pakistan economically quite substantially.
And also, you know, people have worried, you know, that somehow that, you know, that sort of you'll have too much of an Indian face on investment if it happens. I don't think that's the way that Indian investment would take place. I think it would take place in partnerships with Pakistanis. You'd have a Pakistani face on it, but a relationship between the two countries that are the benefit to the two countries.
That's interesting. Dr. Ganguly, I want to basically ask you the same question. I mean, how significant do you see this recent movement towards trade liberalization between the two sides? It's being talked about in sort of a very economic, narrow sense. Do you think there's some strategic value to the two sides opening up or being more open towards greater trade with each other?
It's a positive step, but it's still in abeyance, because as you note correctly, that the Commerce Secretaries are still talking. Nothing really has happened as yet. And if it does happen, we'll have to wait and see what the exact terms are, what is on the positive list, what's on the negative list, and how many Indian firms prove to be sufficiently risk-prone to want to invest in Pakistan. I certainly would like to see some movement, but I think the jury is still out on it. I think we're at a very preliminary stage, and there is a possibility of positive spillovers if certain steps, further steps were to be taken. But at this stage, matters are in a very incipient stage. We really don't know where this will end up, and it also remains to be seen how many Indian firms of any consequence will invest, and whether this is going to simply facilitate trade or will it also contribute to investment. I'm somewhat skeptical about people making significant investments in Pakistan until the political situation becomes a bit more stable in Pakistan. Investors from across the world in recent years have shied away from Pakistan because of the widespread fear of political instability. But trade relations, I can see making some headway.
Dr. Ganguly, that begs the question, you know, from an Indian perspective, what is the advantage of moving towards trade liberalization with Pakistan and further economic ties with Pakistan? Is there an economic benefit here, or is this simply a strategic move on their part?
No, I don't think it's strategic. I think it's primarily the opportunity of finding yet another market in close proximity. There is, as you know, a good deal of trade that takes place through the Persian Gulf, which is directed through third countries. And that is a highly inefficient way to go about conducting trade. I think there could be significant mutual benefits that would accrue from a freer trade regime and a bilateral trade regime. Any strategic benefits that would accrue would be sort of incidental and really long-term.
Right. I want to go back over to Lahore, and Maria, get your guest's opinion on this as well. I mean, both sides, it seems, would benefit from greater trade from each other. But there's also this, obviously, you know, India-Pakistan with its history of 60 years of acrimony towards each other. I mean, is there sort of some political context to this? I mean, will this necessarily move India and Pakistan towards greater understanding on other issues as well?
Dr. Hussain, I'd like you to answer Raza's question, and then I'll move forward and I'll ask you my question.
Yeah, well, I think the central issue that has to be understood in terms of the available evidence is that any two countries which were not trading before, once they begin trade, both gain. There is also massive evidence to show that when a small country begins trade with a large country, the small country gains relatively more. Now, the dynamic of this sort of trading relationship inevitably will involve foreign investment from India. Now, if you look at it in terms of foreign investment, which of course will not only enlarge trade but be a major stimulant to Pakistan's economic growth, then I think we have to understand that three kinds of consequences will flow as far as Pakistan is concerned. The first is that the key crisis at the economic level of Pakistan, which is that we are in a state of deep recession, massive unemployment, high levels of poverty, those could be released if foreign investment comes in from India. And I think Indian investment, being so proximate, is more likely to come than investment from the Western world.
Right.
The second is that enlarged trade will, especially in terms of perishables, food, and consumer goods which the middle classes consume, will mean that the inflation rates in Pakistan will come down, particularly food inflation rates, which are at the moment very high. So if economic growth is stimulated and inflation rates are slowed down, then I think the biggest gainers will be the middle class and the poor in Pakistan. And the third factor is that over time, as trade and investment occurs, new stakeholders will emerge on both sides, stakeholders for economic cooperation rather than military conflict. And so this will be an essential feature in the process of making peace with India. And in many ways, the existence of these stakeholders for peace will facilitate, I think, the resolution of outstanding political disputes.
That's a very interesting point. We'll follow up on that, Dr. Hussain, but for now we have to take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. After the break, you're watching The Platform. I have Dr. Hussain with me here. Dr. Hussain, I'd like to ask you that we were talking about the trade between India and Pakistan, but the most important question that many here in Pakistan ask is that will this be like composite dialogue with India, which was held hostage to issues like Mumbai and terror attacks? God forbid, if anything like this does happen, it will have very strong ramifications on both sides of the border.
No, I think it's important.
Economic ramifications.
Yeah, it's important if we are serious about getting an economic stimulus and building a better economic future for the people of Pakistan, to have trade relations and indeed relations of mutual investment which are in principle uninterruptible by exogenous events, whether it's terrorism or any other political event. And indeed, you know, the process of the resolution of political disputes can take place side by side with the process of economic cooperation and trade. And in many ways, as I've indicated earlier, in many ways, as the benefits of trade and investment begin to manifest themselves for the people of this country and indeed for India, in that case, that will facilitate the resolution of political disputes between the two countries. I think the biggest confidence builder, if you like, for the political process is mutual economic benefit for the two countries.
Right, Raza, I'd like to cross over and ask Dr. Ganguly that, you know, before opening up such channels, shouldn't there be a prerequisite that continuity should remain in case, you know, God forbid, an incident such as Mumbai or any other terror incidents happen on either side of the border?
It's very hard for any government to give such an undertaking in advance. I'm afraid that such an incident probably could have a highly disruptive effect and unravel the progress that has been made. One would like to see the opening that has taken place to continue and to widen, but by the same token, we have to be cognizant of the fact that if an incident of the order that you are suggesting, if that were to occur, I'm afraid all bets are would really be off. Because of the very fraught and fragile nature of the relationship, which has been alluded to several times during the course of this conversation.
Right. Dr. Ganguly, I mean, along the same lines, I mean, you've seen what has been transpiring over the past few months between India and Pakistan. There seems to be a understanding on both sides that closer ties are something that should be worked towards. Do you see that, you know, simply in the last few months and few weeks, because of this movement on trade, that some sort of critical mass of a buffer against a Mumbai-style attack might have emerged, or do you still think we're still at a phase where we were maybe in 2009 or 2010?
No, I'm afraid the memories of Mumbai still remain alive, and all that is needed is another incident which could again spark off considerable discord and considerable tension. I think it's a bit premature to think that we have built up constituencies on both sides which could act as a bulwark against the possibilities of a fundamental rupture in ties. Bear in mind that we are really at a very early stage in the discussion, and also let us not ignore the fact that there are constituencies on both sides of the border which look upon with a jaundiced eye on the developments that have taken place recently. Not everyone shares the enthusiasm that has been expressed on this program.
Well, I mean, if you could expand on that, Dr. Ganguly, who on either side do you feel would be opposed to this forward movement in the India-Pakistan ties?
Well, there are hawkish elements on both sides of the border who remain unreconciled. Without mentioning specific individuals or groups, I think it is not unreasonable to argue that there are elements of the political spectrum which have not quite come to the position that proceeding with trade and investment talks and a more relaxed climate in the economic arena is necessarily the pathway to go. There are people in Pakistan who still believe that the Kashmir dispute should be paramount, is of paramount significance. There are people in India who believe that the miscreants who were responsible for the Mumbai attacks and other attacks on Indian soil really need to be brought to justice before a breakthrough takes place in Indo-Pakistani relations, and consequently they do not have a similar amount of stock in the economic relationship.
Right. Maria, you have a question? Go ahead. We'll go back to Dr. Anderson right after you.
Yes, I think while the professor is pointing out with a certain realism the dangers of violence or terrorism adversely affecting the growth of trade, equally I think one needs to understand that there is a dialectic taking place between the leaderships of the two countries on the one hand and the so-called hawks within the countries on the other. You see, the true quality of leadership is to overcome the negative pressures of ideology and hostility and hate in the best interests, material welfare of the people of those countries. And in a sense, the very fact that the MFN status is being granted by both countries to each other, and a new chapter in a sense is being opened up in trade relations, indicates the maturity and quality of leadership on both sides, that in many ways they've been able to transcend the hate mongers and move in favor of the material welfare and the building of a better future for their respective people.
Right.
Right, Raza.
Right. Maria, yeah, Dr. Anderson, how do you see this question here of the constituencies on both sides of the border that may not be as favorable towards trade?
Well, I mean, I totally agree with Professor Ganguly that you have these groups, and without going into specific names and groups, and we more or less know who they are.
You can go on a limb.
Oh, okay, go on a limb. Okay, well, you know, much of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, is not enthusiastic about this move. You have others outside that party who also aren't, who insist that the issue of Mumbai and terrorism in general has to be approached first, that trade really isn't the leading issue between the two countries. And I think if you read some of the Indian press, particularly the Hindi language press, you'll see this viewpoint expressed. On the Pakistan side, I just read the other yesterday, I think it was, a Kashmir group, one of the Kashmir groups said this is awful, that, you know, that Pakistan is giving up the Kashmir cause for a mere pittance, as I think is the way they argued it, that though it's more than a mere pittance involved in this case. And you have the various Islamic groups who are also expressing differences with this view. So, and I suspect that within the military you also have some, though I think that the military had to vet this before it happened, at least at the top level. But my guess is that within the military you also have some people who are genuinely concerned about this move that's being made.
Right. I want to ask our guest in Lahore this question. We'll move on actually soon to this question of Afghanistan and India-Pakistan relations. But before we do that, I want to ask you, this MFN and liberalizing of trade between India and Pakistan, negotiations are in progress. The Commerce Secretaries met last week. But as many people say, the devil's in the details. What are some of the specifics, some of the stumbling blocks that still are in place that could lead to this process not bearing as much fruit as is hoped at this point?
I think the essential constraint to rapid progress on the trade issue is the non-tariff barriers, which in a sense exist on both sides. And these non-tariff barriers very quickly are of three kinds. First, we do not have at the regional level institutions or organizations which can certify quality of the products being exchanged. So you have a situation where, for example, perishable commodities from Pakistan get exported to India and they're stopped at the border pending the certification from an organization somewhere in Bombay or Mumbai. And so by the time the certification comes through, you've lost the goods. So I think it's essential that this particular non-tariff barrier of certification be overcome by establishing cross-border organizations that can quickly certify, in fact certify before the goods get exported. The second is harmonization of procedures at the border. It often takes a very long time and India as well as Pakistan have slightly differing procedures with respect to exports of goods. I think these need to be harmonized fairly quickly. And the third, of course, refers to things like opening of letters of credit, transfer of funds. These need to be, you need an institutional structure, rules, banks which exist on both sides of the border through which letters of credit can be opened up and through which funds can be transferred from one country to the other.
Right. Right. Dr. Hussain, you want to add to that?
Right. Let me add to that. I think that all three are right, but those are technical details that can be worked out. And there's an experience around the world of procedures to use. I think that they could actually implement procedures relatively fast. What the big problem is not that. The big problem is bureaucrats on both sides who resist moving in the right direction. Whatever the rules may say, anyone who has dealt with South Asian bureaucracies, or any bureaucracy as a matter of that fact, knows that the key is in the discretionary power of a bureaucrat. So the bureaucrats have to be convinced that the top leadership supports this and that their careers depend on at least going along. And I have actually specific knowledge of this. My wife owns some factories in India, and she has negotiated to import cotton from Pakistan, which is one of the great assets that Pakistan has. It has some of the best cotton in the world, relatively cheap. But on both sides of the border, it was bureaucrats who made it impossible, so she dropped the idea. And this is something that has to be tackled, and it has to be tackled from the top.
Right. Bureaucrats and lawyers will forever be the bane of humanity, it seems. We will be taking a break right now. When we get back, we'll talk about India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan.
Welcome back after the break. You're watching The Platform. Dr. Hussain, I'd like to ask you, what are the broader implications of opening up trade with India?
Yes, well, we seem to be at in a sense, a unique moment in the history of the world, because for the first time, the center of gravity of the global economy is shifting from the West. For the first time in 300 years, it's shifting from the West to this part of the world. At present trends of growth rate, of GDP growth rates of China, the United States and India, it seems to me that over the next 25 years, China will emerge as the world's largest economy, and India the world's third largest economy after the United States. Now, if SAFTA gets implemented, if free trade and investment opens up and South Asia achieves economic integration, then South Asia could become the second largest economy in the world after China. So what we're really talking about is that this region could become potentially the greatest economic powerhouse in human history. So in that context, I would say that Pakistan has a very clear choice. Either it integrates with South Asia and gets catapulted into a kind of leadership position in the global economy, and where its economy gets stimulated, you get into a different trajectory of GDP growth rate, you are able to overcome poverty and unemployment over the next 20-25 years, or to remain a basket case where it remains mired in deep recession, high levels of poverty, conflict, brutality. So the choice is very clear: either to build a better future for our people by integrating in South Asia, or to continue the policy of conflict, violence, hostility, and underdevelopment.
Right. Raza, let's cross over to you.
Sure. Maya, thank you. We only have a few minutes left, actually, but I did want to get to this question while we're talking about India, Pakistan, of Afghanistan and the cooperation of India and Pakistan in that country, or lack of cooperation, let's put it. Dr. Ganguly, I want to come to you. We've talked today about trade relations between the two sides. You said it's fragile, but you know, there's a consensus that it seems to be moving forward in some level. In Afghanistan, it doesn't look as rosy. What do you see as Pakistan and Afghanistan and India's primary issue in Afghanistan? We saw in Istanbul that Pakistan did not really want to do a regional framework agreement, whereas other countries were more interested in that, including India. Tell us a little bit about this rift in Afghanistan.
From the Pakistani standpoint, as I understand it, that there is a real fear that Indian investments in Afghanistan, which are primarily in the realm of economic development, is not simply what meets the eye. That actually that India has strategic designs in Afghanistan to encircle Pakistan, and that India hopes to have a much greater role in shaping Afghanistan's polity after the U.S. and the International Security Assistance Force.
How true is that, Dr. Ganguly?
Well, all I'm saying is that this is a Pakistani fear. I don't know that the evidence really supports this fear. Obviously, India would like a friendly regime in Afghanistan. India would not like to see a resurrection of a neo-Taliban regime in Afghanistan, because India suffered grievously at the hands of the Taliban regime. You will recall that an Indian aircraft was hijacked to Afghanistan, and the hijackers were allowed to go scot-free. So the Indians have real fears. I'm not dismissing Pakistan's fears, but on the other hand, I think the evidence that India is interested in pursuing some malfeasance from Afghanistan really does not stand up to careful scrutiny. But nevertheless, given the existence of Indo-Pakistani hostility, I'm not entirely surprised that Pakistan remains concerned about what kind of role India expects to play in a post-American Afghanistan.
We have just about a minute left, Dr. Anderson. I want to get you to weigh on this. What do you see as the primary issue of conflict here, and shed some light on this regional framework versus the more specific frameworks that Pakistan talks about?
Well, the U.S. actually introduced the idea formally of a regional framework in Bruce Rydell's chaired study for the Obama administration. It was not repeated in the president's speech at West Point in December of that year, but several Americans, very senior, who have influence in the government, like Henry Kissinger and others, have written that this is a necessary step that needs to be taken. I personally think it does. It is too. The question is how to get it started. We probably have to be involved in starting the process and encourage others to join in. But I think, to be quite frank, at the end of the day, it's got to be India and Pakistan that talk about this issue to each other. Now, that's not going to be the immediate step of high priority the economic is likely to be, but it's got to come relatively soon after that. And I say that not just because of Afghanistan, because you're talking about the issue of terrorism, because some of the terrorist groups who have safe havens in Pakistan that operate in Afghanistan also operate on the other side as well through links. So I think Pakistan has to make a decision that if it really wants to integrate, as the professor noted, and I think very rightly so, it's really got to crack down on these terrorist groups.
Terrorism issue. Yeah. Right. That's an important point, and it's unfortunately all the time we have for this is something we wish to debate a little further, and we will do so in future shows. But for right now, here in Washington, we're going to say good night, and over to you, Maria, to wrap up the show.
Thank you, Raza. Now, Dr. Hussain, I'd like to ask you, we were talking about Afghanistan. One fear that Pakistan has of granting India the MFN status is that sooner or later India is going to ask for the transit trade via Afghanistan to get into Afghanistan. Is that fear justified?
Well, you know, first of all, let me very quickly say that the idea that it is Pakistan's view that India is going to encircle Pakistan through its economic development initiatives in Afghanistan is not necessarily the view of the whole country. It may be the view of certain elements within society and within the state structure. But it is there's certainly no consensus on this within the country as a whole. Indeed, there is a rational view prevailing in Pakistan now increasingly, which is that trade between India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, or indeed investment, is not a zero-sum game. I mean, there's really no reason why India trading with Afghanistan and Pakistan trading with Afghanistan and Pakistan trading with India will not lead to increased gains for all three countries. I mean, this has been the historical, there's huge historical evidence to show that when two countries or more than two countries trade amongst themselves, it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody gains.
Dr. Akmal, we're out of time. I wish we had more time. And I'd just like to wrap up this program and say that, you know, it seems like the economic way is the way forward for India, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Whether that happens or not, only time will tell. Maria Zulfikar Khan signing out for tonight. Good night and Allah Hafiz.